In the tense silence that followed the Second World War, the world did not move toward peace, but into a new and more dangerous equilibrium. Two superpowers emerged from the rubble, armed not only with ideology, but with nuclear weapons capable of ending civilization in hours. The United States and the Soviet Union faced each other across continents, oceans, and political systems, locked in a confrontation defined by uncertainty. Neither side truly understood the other's capabilities, intentions, or limits. In this new reality, ignorance itself became a strategic threat. The greatest danger of the early Cold War was not what either side knew, but what they feared. American military planners worried that the Soviet Union might be secretly producing fleets of long-range bombers or developing intercontinental missiles beyond anything the West could counter. These anxieties produced the so-called bomber gap and later the missile gap, concepts that shaped defense budgets and foreign policy despite being based largely on speculation. Without reliable intelligence, every assumption risked escalation. The problem was brutally clear. The United States needed accurate, continuous insight into the closed world of the Soviet Union, and it needed that intelligence without triggering open war. Traditional espionage could not solve this problem. Human intelligence networks were limited, dangerous, and slow. Ground-based observation was nearly impossible across the Iron Curtain. Aerial reconnaissance offered the most promising solution, but existing aircraft could not penetrate deep into Soviet territory and survive. Fighters and bombers of the late 1940s and early 1950s were constrained by altitude, range, and endurance. Surface-to-air defenses were improving rapidly, and any aircraft shot down over Soviet soil would become an international crisis overnight. The sky itself had become the battlefield, and altitude was emerging as the ultimate form of protection. It was within this strategic vacuum that an idea began to form, one that challenged nearly every assumption of military aviation. Rather than relying on speed or armament, what if an aircraft could simply fly so high that no enemy weapon could reach it? At the time, this concept bordered on fantasy. Flying above 70,000 feet meant operating in air so thin that conventional aerodynamic principles barely applied. Engines struggled to breathe, wings struggled to generate lift, and pilots faced physiological dangers unknown outside experimental laboratories. Yet this was precisely the space where American engineers saw opportunity. The responsibility for turning this idea into reality fell to a small, secretive group within Lockheed Aircraft Corporation. At its center was Clarence Kelly Johnson, a gifted engineer with an uncompromising approach to design and management. Johnson believed that revolutionary problems required revolutionary methods. He assembled a tiny team, isolated them from corporate bureaucracy, and gave them a single objective: build an aircraft capable of sustained flight at extreme altitude with unprecedented range and reliability. This team would later become known as the Skunk Works, a name that came to symbolize rapid innovation under pressure. The aircraft they envisioned bore little resemblance to contemporary military designs. It would be long and slender, with wings of extraordinary span relative to its fuselage, more reminiscent of a glider than a jet-powered aircraft. These wings were not a stylistic choice, they were a necessity. At extreme altitude, lift is scarce, and only a large wing area could keep the aircraft aloft. Every pound mattered. Structural components were shaved to the minimum, fuel tanks were integrated into the wings, and even paint was reconsidered to save weight. The margin for error was vanishingly small. Power came from a modified jet engine capable of operating across an enormous altitude range, from takeoff at sea level to cruise near the edge of space. This alone presented unprecedented engineering challenges. The engine had to deliver stable thrust in air densities less than a tenth of those at ground level, while remaining efficient enough to support missions lasting more than 10 hours. Fuel systems, inlet designs, and control logic all had to be reinvented. Nothing like this had ever been attempted in an operational aircraft. The political risk was as significant as the technical one. The program was so sensitive that it bypassed normal military procurement channels and was instead managed by the Central Intelligence Agency. This was not a weapon of war, but an instrument of information, and its value depended entirely on secrecy. If the Soviets knew what the aircraft could do, they would adapt their defenses accordingly. The success of the entire project rested on staying one step ahead in an invisible race. When the aircraft that would become known as the U-2 finally took shape, it represented a triumph of engineering discipline and strategic clarity. Its first flights revealed both its promise and its dangers. The aircraft could indeed reach altitudes no fighter could touch, but it was notoriously difficult to fly. At cruise altitude, the difference between stall speed and maximum safe speed was often less than 10 knots. Pilots described it as balancing on a knife edge, where a minor mistake could lead to loss of control. Landing was equally challenging, requiring chase cars on the runway to guide pilots whose forward visibility was severely limited by the aircraft's long nose and bicycle-style landing gear. Despite these challenges, the U-2 quickly proved its worth. Equipped with high-resolution cameras capable of distinguishing objects just a few feet across from extreme altitude, it delivered intelligence that reshaped Western understanding of Soviet capabilities. The feared bomber gap dissolved under photographic evidence. Missile sites could be identified, counted, and monitored over time. For the first time, policymakers had concrete data rather than worst-case assumptions. In this sense, the aircraft did not simply gather intelligence. It stabilized the strategic balance by replacing fear with knowledge. The impact of these missions extended far beyond military planning. Accurate intelligence enabled arms control negotiations, informed diplomatic strategy, and reduced the likelihood of catastrophic miscalculation. The U-2 became an invisible stabilizer of the Cold War, a silent presence above geopolitical tension. Its very existence altered the behavior of nations, even when its flights were never publicly acknowledged. That secrecy, however, could not last forever. As Soviet air defenses improved, the assumption of invulnerability eroded. This reality came into sharp focus in 1960, when a U-2 piloted by France's Gary Powers was shot down over Soviet territory. The incident exposed the program to the world and triggered a major diplomatic crisis. Yet even this moment underscored the aircraft's significance. The fact that it took years of focused effort and advanced technology to finally counter the U-2 was itself a testament to how far ahead its design had been. Rather than ending the story, the shootdown marked a transition. Lessons learned from the U-2 directly influenced the development of even more advanced reconnaissance platforms, including satellites and aircraft like the State Route 71 Blackbird. Concepts pioneered in the U-2 program, high-altitude aerodynamics, lightweight structures, and integrated intelligence systems, became foundations for future aerospace innovation. The aircraft itself continued to evolve, adapted with new sensors, improved survivability, and expanded mission profiles. Decades after its first flight, variants of the U-2 remained in service, a rare testament to the durability of its original design philosophy. Culturally, the U-2 became an icon of a particular moment in history, when engineering ingenuity served as a bridge between secrecy and security. It symbolized the belief that technology, carefully applied, could prevent war rather than provoke it. In an era defined by distrust, the aircraft represented rationality, evidence, and restraint. Its pilots flew alone for hours at altitudes few humans had ever experienced, carrying not weapons, but cameras and sensors whose true power lay in information. The legacy of the U-2 is therefore not confined to aviation. It reshaped intelligence gathering, influenced international relations, and demonstrated how engineering excellence could alter the course of global history without firing a single shot. It proved that the most transformative technologies are often those designed not to destroy, but to observe, understand, and inform. In the end, the story of the U-2 is a story about ambition disciplined by responsibility. It is about engineers who dared to imagine flight beyond conventional limits, and leaders who understood that knowledge could be as decisive as force. High above the clouds, where the sky darkens and the horizon curves, the U-2 wrote a quiet chapter of history, reminding the world that the history of aviation is written with steel, ingenuity, and the will to challenge limits. As the Cold War intensified through the late 1950s and early 1960s, the implications of high-altitude reconnaissance began to ripple far beyond the confines of engineering labs and secret airfields. The U-2 was no longer just a solution to an intelligence problem. It had become a strategic instrument that quietly reshaped how nations perceive power, vulnerability, and restraint. Every successful mission reinforced a new reality. Dominance in the modern world would be decided not only by weapons, but by information. The engineering philosophy behind the aircraft proved as influential as the aircraft itself. The U-2 demonstrated that specialization, when executed with precision, could outperform brute force. It was not designed to dogfight, to intimidate through visible strength, or to overwhelm defenses with speed. Instead, it exploited a neglected dimension of warfare: altitude as sanctuary. This idea challenged decades of military thinking and forced adversaries to rethink how airspace could be controlled. In response, the Soviet Union poured immense resources into radar networks, surface-to-air missiles, and interceptor aircraft, accelerating an arms race that extended vertically as much as it did horizontally. At the same time, the data collected by the U-2 fundamentally altered Western intelligence culture. Analysts were no longer forced to rely primarily on intercepted communications, defectors, or extrapolations from limited evidence. High-resolution imagery allowed for empirical analysis. Missile silos could be counted, airfields could be measured, industrial facilities could be monitored over time. Patterns replaced speculation. This shift toward evidence-based intelligence became one of the most important, yet least visible, transformations of the Cold War era. The socioeconomic impact of this capability was subtle but profound. Accurate intelligence reduced the pressure to overproduce weapons systems based on fear rather than necessity. Defense budgets, while still enormous, could be justified with clearer strategic logic. Diplomatic negotiations gained a factual backbone. When leaders sat across from each other at summits, they did so with a clearer understanding of the balance of power. In this way, the U-2 indirectly contributed to global economic stability by reducing the likelihood of sudden, panic-driven escalation. From an engineering perspective, the aircraft's longevity became one of its most remarkable achievements. While many Cold War systems were rendered obsolete within a decade by rapid technological change, the U-2 proved adaptable. Its basic airframe, optimized for altitude and endurance, remained relevant even as sensors evolved. Cameras gave way to electronic intelligence packages, radar mapping systems, and later digital imaging technologies. Each new payload extended the aircraft's relevance into new strategic contexts, from nuclear monitoring to battlefield surveillance and disaster assessment. This adaptability highlighted a key lesson in aerospace design. When a platform is built around a clear, fundamental principle, it can outlast generations of incremental innovation. The U-2 was not overdesigned for a single moment. It was designed around physics itself, exploiting the persistent advantages of altitude and endurance. As long as there was value in seeing farther and staying aloft longer, the aircraft had a role to play. The human element remained central throughout its service. Pilots selected for the U-2 program faced conditions unlike those of any other operational aircraft. Long missions in a pressure suit, isolation at extreme altitude, and constant vigilance against physiological stress demanded a rare combination of technical skill and mental resilience. These aviators were not simply flying missions. They were managing systems at the edge of human and mechanical tolerance. Their experiences informed advances in life support systems, pressure suits, and human-machine integration that later benefited both military and civilian aerospace endeavors. As space-based reconnaissance matured, many predicted the end of the U-2. Satellites offered global coverage without risking pilots or violating sovereign airspace in the same way. Yet the aircraft endured. Its ability to be rapidly deployed, retasked in real time, and upgraded with new sensors gave it flexibility that early satellites could not match. This coexistence of airborne and orbital intelligence platforms underscored another enduring truth: no single technology dominates forever. Strategic advantage comes from layered capabilities, each compensating for the limitations of the others. By the late Cold War and into the post-Cold War world, the U-2's mission expanded beyond its original purpose. It monitored arms control treaties, supported humanitarian operations, and provided intelligence during regional conflicts far removed from its original Soviet focus. What began as a narrow solution to a specific geopolitical crisis evolved into a versatile tool for global awareness. Few aircraft can claim such a transformation without losing their core identity. In retrospect, the U-2 stands as a case study in how engineering decisions can influence the trajectory of history. It did not end the Cold War, nor did it eliminate conflict, but it changed the terms under which decisions were made. It reduced uncertainty in an era where uncertainty could trigger annihilation. It demonstrated that technological ambition, when aligned with strategic restraint, can serve as a force for stability rather than destruction. The aircraft's legacy is not measured solely in flight hours or missions completed, but in the mindset it established. It proved that the most consequential breakthroughs often occur at the intersection of necessity and imagination. Faced with an unsolvable problem, a small group of engineers chose to challenge assumptions rather than accept limitations. In doing so, they created a machine that quietly influenced decades of global policy. High above the reach of conventional flight, the U-2 embodied a paradox of the Cold War. That peace sometimes depended on the ability to look rather than strike. Its story reminds us that the history of aviation is not only about speed and power, but about perspective. And in gaining that perspective, humanity learned that seeing clearly can be one of the most powerful tools ever engineered. By the mid-1960s, the Cold War had entered a more complex and dangerous phase. The binary standoff between two superpowers was now layered with proxy wars, nuclear brinkmanship, and rapid technological escalation. In this environment, the role of the U-2 quietly evolved from a revolutionary breakthrough into a mature instrument of strategic continuity. Its importance no longer lay in novelty, but in reliability. It had become part of the invisible infrastructure that allowed global power to be exercised with restraint rather than panic. The aircraft's survival beyond its original mission was not accidental. It was the result of deliberate engineering foresight and institutional learning. From the beginning, the U-2 had been designed with margins that could accommodate future change. Its enormous wings provided lift capacity well beyond its initial payload requirements. Its long endurance created opportunities for new mission profiles. As intelligence priorities shifted from simple photographic reconnaissance to signals intelligence, electronic surveillance, and radar mapping, the U-2 adapted without losing its core advantage. Where other aircraft required wholesale redesign, the U-2 absorbed innovation incrementally. This adaptability transformed the aircraft into a bridge between eras. It connected the age of manned reconnaissance flights over hostile territory to the emerging world of space-based surveillance. During this transition, the U-2 filled critical gaps. Satellites, while powerful, were constrained by orbital mechanics. They passed over targets on predictable schedules and could not linger. The U-2, by contrast, could be launched on demand, loiter for hours, and focus on areas of sudden interest. This flexibility proved invaluable during crises, when timing mattered as much as resolution. The strategic value of this capability became evident during moments of acute tension. In periods when misinterpretation could trigger irreversible consequences, the U-2 provided clarity. It allowed decision-makers to verify compliance with treaties, monitor force movements, and distinguish preparation from provocation. This function was not dramatic, but it was essential. Stability in the nuclear age depended on confidence, and confidence depended on observation. The aircraft's quiet presence reduced the incentive for worst-case thinking, which in turn reduced the likelihood of catastrophic escalation. From a socioeconomic perspective, this role had far-reaching implications. Intelligence accuracy influences resource allocation at the highest levels of government. When threats are exaggerated, nations overspend, diverting capital from civilian development to military production. When threats are underestimated, vulnerability invites aggression. By narrowing this margin of error, the U-2 indirectly shaped economic priorities. Defense planning became more measured. Industrial output aligned more closely with actual risk. Over time, this contributed to a more sustainable balance between security and growth within the Western world. The aircraft also reshaped how institutions thought about risk. Early Cold War strategy often assumed that technological advantage was fleeting and that every breakthrough would be rapidly countered. The U-2 challenged this assumption. Its core advantage, altitude, was rooted in physics, not tactics. Countering it required massive investment in radar coverage, missile technology, and interceptor development. This asymmetry demonstrated that certain engineering solutions could impose disproportionate costs on adversaries. In effect, the U-2 shifted the economic burden of competition upward, forcing opponents to spend more simply to deny its advantage. Within the aerospace community, the lessons were equally profound. The success of the U-2 validated a design philosophy centered on purpose-driven minimalism. Rather than attempting to create a multi-role platform, engineers focused on doing one thing exceptionally well. This clarity of intent simplified decision-making, reduced compromise, and produced a machine that operated near theoretical limits without collapsing under its own complexity. Future programs would draw heavily from this example, particularly in the development of specialized high-performance aircraft. The human factor remained inseparable from this technological legacy. U-2 pilots continued to operate at the intersection of human endurance and machine capability. Missions routinely lasted more than 10 hours, conducted in pressure suits that isolated pilots from their environment while demanding constant vigilance. The physiological challenges of hypoxia, dehydration, and fatigue were not secondary concerns. They were central constraints that shaped mission planning and aircraft operation. Solutions developed for these challenges influenced broader aerospace medicine and human factors engineering, leaving a legacy that extended into spaceflight and commercial aviation. As decades passed, the geopolitical landscape continued to shift. The Cold War formally ended, but the need for strategic awareness did not. New regions of instability emerged, along with non-state actors and asymmetric threats. Once again, the U-2 adapted. Its sensors evolved to support battlefield surveillance, maritime monitoring, and humanitarian response. It provided intelligence during regional conflicts, assisted in disaster assessment after natural catastrophes, and supported counter-proliferation efforts in an increasingly multipolar world. Each new role reinforced the same underlying truth: altitude, endurance, and adaptability remained invaluable. This continued relevance challenged assumptions about technological obsolescence. In an era obsessed with replacement and disruption, the U-2 demonstrated the power of evolutionary improvement over revolutionary discard. By continuously integrating new technologies into a stable platform, it achieved a form of longevity rarely seen in military systems. This approach reduced life cycle costs, preserved institutional knowledge, and maintained operational continuity. It was not simply an aircraft that lasted, it was a system that learned. The broader cultural impact of the U-2 is often overlooked precisely because of its secrecy. Unlike iconic fighters or bombers, it did not dominate headlines or air shows. Its influence was exercised quietly, through briefings rather than broadcasts. Yet this invisibility was part of its power. It reinforced a conception of strength rooted in understanding rather than intimidation. In doing so, it subtly redefined what technological leadership could look like in a world where overt displays of power carried unacceptable risks. In evaluating the U-2's place in history, it becomes clear that its greatest contribution was not a single mission or moment, but a sustained pattern of restraint enabled by knowledge. It showed that engineering excellence could serve as a stabilizing force, reducing uncertainty in systems prone to overreaction. It also demonstrated that the true measure of innovation is not how dramatically it arrives, but how effectively it endures. The aircraft story up to this point reveals a central lesson of the Cold War: that survival often depended on the ability to see clearly without being seen, to know without provoking, and to prepare without accelerating conflict. The U-2 embodied this balance. It operated at the edge of the atmosphere and the edge of politics, where errors carried global consequences. As the world moved forward, the foundations laid by the U-2 would continue to shape aerospace design, intelligence strategy, and international stability. Its influence extended beyond metal and machinery into doctrine, economics, and diplomacy. In this sense, the aircraft was never merely a response to a moment in history. It became a framework for how technology could be used to manage uncertainty in an interconnected and fragile world. As the world entered the late 20th century, the legacy of the U-2 increasingly revealed itself not through confrontation, but through influence. The aircraft had long since proven its original purpose, yet its most enduring impact lay in how it reshaped the trajectory of aerospace development and strategic thinking. The lessons embedded in its design philosophy radiated outward, affecting generations of aircraft, satellites, and intelligence systems that followed. One of the most significant influences of the U-2 was its validation of altitude as a strategic domain. Prior to its introduction, altitude was largely viewed as a tactical advantage, a means to gain a temporary edge in combat or reconnaissance. The U-2 transformed altitude into a persistent strategic asset. This shift altered how engineers and planners conceptualized airspace itself. It was no longer merely a medium to traverse, but a layered environment where dominance could be established vertically. This idea directly influenced the development of later high-altitude platforms, including advanced reconnaissance aircraft and long-endurance unmanned systems designed to loiter above conventional air traffic and threats. The aircraft's aerodynamic configuration became a reference point for engineers working on extreme altitude flight. Its long, high aspect ratio wings demonstrated how lift efficiency could be maximized in thin air, pushing performance closer to theoretical limits. These principles found echoes not only in military designs, but also in scientific research aircraft and atmospheric platforms used for climate study and Earth observation. In these contexts, the U-2's legacy transcended geopolitics, contributing to humanity's understanding of the planet itself. Equally influential was the U-2's approach to structural design. Weight reduction was not treated as an optimization goal, but as a foundational requirement. Engineers learned to think in terms of necessity rather than excess, questioning every component and assumption. This mindset became a hallmark of advanced aerospace programs. The emphasis on simplicity, integration, and discipline directly informed later projects that operated under extreme constraints, from stealth aircraft to spacecraft designed for long-duration missions. In each case, the U-2 served as a reminder that performance emerges not from complexity, but from clarity of purpose. The evolution of sensors aboard the aircraft further expanded its influence. Originally conceived as a photographic platform, the U-2 became a testbed for successive generations of intelligence-gathering technology. As electronics miniaturized and computing power increased, the aircraft absorbed capabilities that its designers could scarcely have imagined. Synthetic aperture radar, signals intelligence arrays, and multispectral imaging systems transformed it into a flying network of sensors. This integration of platform and payload established a model for modular intelligence systems, where adaptability became as valuable as raw performance. This modular approach proved essential as intelligence requirements diversified. The world that followed the Cold War was less predictable and more fragmented. Threats were no longer defined solely by nation-states, but by regional instability, irregular warfare, and proliferation risks. The U-2's ability to adapt to these shifting priorities underscored a crucial insight. Flexibility is itself a form of power. By remaining relevant across radically different strategic environments, the aircraft demonstrated how well-designed systems can transcend the conditions that created them. The influence of the U-2 also extended into organizational culture. The success of its development program reinforced the effectiveness of small, autonomous teams empowered to make rapid decisions. This model challenged traditional hierarchical approaches to large-scale engineering projects. Over time, it inspired changes in how advanced aerospace programs were managed, emphasizing accountability, speed, and direct communication. The resulting cultural shift proved as impactful as any technological innovation, shaping how future breakthroughs were pursued. In the realm of international relations, the U-2 left a more subtle but no less significant imprint. Its role in verification and monitoring laid the groundwork for modern arms control regimes. The ability to independently confirm compliance with treaties reduced reliance on trust alone, making agreements more durable and politically viable. This verification capability became a cornerstone of strategic stability, demonstrating how technology could enable cooperation even among adversaries. In this sense, The aircraft contributed to a framework of accountability that extended well beyond its operational lifespan. Culturally, the U-2 occupied a unique position as both a symbol of secrecy and a catalyst for transparency. While its missions were classified, their outcomes often informed public policy decisions that shaped global discourse. This duality reflected a broader tension in the Cold War world, the need to conceal methods while revealing truths. The aircraft embodied this balance, operating unseen while producing knowledge that influenced visible outcomes. Its legacy thus included a redefinition of how secrecy and openness could coexist in service of stability. The aircraft's continued service into the 21st century further reinforced its iconic status. In an age dominated by rapid technological turnover, the U-2 stood as a counterexample. Its persistence challenged the assumption that newer is always better, highlighting instead the value of robust foundations and incremental improvement. This lesson resonated across industries, reinforcing the idea that longevity can be a marker of excellence rather than stagnation. As aerospace technology advanced, many of the challenges first confronted by the U-2 resurfaced in new forms. High-altitude unmanned systems grappled with similar aerodynamic and endurance constraints. Spacecraft designers faced analogous issues of weight, efficiency, and human-machine interaction. In each case, the solutions pioneered decades earlier offered guidance. The U-2's influence thus extended forward in time, shaping not only what was built, but how engineers approached the act of building itself. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of the aircraft's legacy lies in its philosophical implications. The U-2 represented a belief that knowledge could mitigate conflict, that understanding an adversary reduced the likelihood of catastrophic miscalculation. This belief informed not only intelligence strategy, but broader approaches to global security. It suggested that the pursuit of awareness, when guided by restraint, could serve as a stabilizing force in an unstable world. In reflecting on this legacy, it becomes clear that the U-2 was more than a response to a specific historical moment. It was a template for how engineering ambition could align with geopolitical responsibility. Its influence can be traced through aircraft, institutions, and doctrines that continue to shape the modern world. Long after its first flights, the principles it embodied remain deeply embedded in the fabric of aerospace innovation. Through its design, evolution, and sustained relevance, the U-2 demonstrated that true impact is measured not by spectacle, but by endurance. It showed that the most transformative technologies are often those that quietly redefine boundaries and expectations. In doing so, it left an imprint that extended far beyond the thin air in which it flew, shaping how humanity approaches the challenge of seeing clearly in a complex and uncertain world. In the final accounting, the story of the U-2 is not confined to a single era, adversary, or mission set. It is a story about how human ingenuity responds when the stakes are absolute and the margin for error disappears. Born from fear and uncertainty, the aircraft ultimately became an instrument of clarity, proving that the most powerful technologies are not always those that strike hardest, but those that reveal the truth with precision and restraint. The Cold War demanded answers to questions that could not be negotiated away or postponed. How many weapons does the adversary have? Where are they deployed? Are preparations underway for attack, or is the threat imagined? Before the U-2, these questions were largely unanswerable. Leaders acted on fragments, rumors, and worst-case assumptions. The result was a world perpetually poised on the brink. The U-2 changed this dynamic by transforming uncertainty into measurable reality. It allowed policymakers to replace speculation with evidence and emotion with analysis. This transformation was not accidental. It was the direct result of a design philosophy that treated engineering as a strategic tool rather than a technical exercise. Every aspect of the aircraft reflected this mindset. Its extreme altitude capability was not a pursuit of records, but a deliberate solution to a geopolitical problem. Its fragile handling characteristics were accepted because the mission demanded performance beyond conventional safety margins. Its longevity was not planned in years, but earned through adaptability. The U-2 was engineered with a clarity of purpose that few systems ever achieve. What makes this achievement remarkable is that it emerged from constraint rather than abundance. The engineers who created the U-2 did not have unlimited resources or time. They worked under intense secrecy, political pressure, and technological uncertainty. Yet these constraints sharpened their focus. Forced to prioritize essentials, they stripped the aircraft down to its functional core. In doing so, they produced a machine that operated closer to the laws of physics than to the traditions of aviation. This discipline became one of its greatest strengths. Over time, the aircraft outlived the very crisis that had necessitated its creation. The Cold War ended, borders shifted, and threats evolved. Yet the need for accurate, timely intelligence did not disappear. Instead, it diversified. The U-2 adapted once more, demonstrating that relevance is not a function of novelty, but of utility. Its continued service into the modern era stands as evidence that a well-conceived design can transcend the context of its birth. The broader lesson of the U-2 lies in how it redefined the relationship between technology and power. In many periods of history, technological dominance has been equated with visible force. The U-2 challenged this assumption. Its power was invisible, exercised quietly through briefings rather than battles. It shaped outcomes without spectacle, influencing decisions before crises erupted rather than reacting after damage was done. In this sense, it represented a more mature expression of technological strength. There is also a deeply human dimension to this legacy. The pilots who flew the U-2 operated in isolation, at altitudes that separated them physically and psychologically from the world below. They trusted an aircraft that offered little forgiveness, guided by instruments and procedures refined through hard-earned experience. Their missions required patience, discipline, and an acceptance of risk that mirrored the broader responsibilities of the nuclear age. Through them, the aircraft became a partnership between human judgment and mechanical precision. The influence of the U-2 continues to echo through modern aerospace systems. High-altitude unmanned aircraft, space-based sensors, and integrated intelligence networks all trace conceptual lineage back to the same principles first proven in its design. The idea that endurance, perspective, and adaptability matter as much as speed or firepower has become foundational. Even as technology advances, these principles remain constant, reinforcing the U-2's place as a reference point rather than a relic. In reflecting on its impact, it becomes clear that the U-2 helped redefine success in aviation. Success was not measured solely by performance metrics or tactical victories, but by strategic outcomes over time. Did it reduce uncertainty? Did it enable stability? Did it prevent miscalculation? By these measures, the aircraft stands as one of the most consequential creations in the history of flight. Its contributions are woven into decades of decisions that never made headlines precisely because disaster was avoided. The U-2's story also serves as a reminder that the greatest challenges often demand unconventional thinking. When faced with an intelligence problem that seemed unsolvable, its creators did not attempt incremental improvement. They changed the frame entirely, moving upward into a domain where existing rules no longer applied. This willingness to abandon assumptions is at the heart of innovation, not only in aviation, but in all fields where complexity and risk intersect. As the world continues to grapple with new forms of uncertainty, the relevance of this lesson endures. Technology alone cannot guarantee security, but technology guided by purpose and restraint can shape conditions where stability becomes possible. The U-2 embodied this balance. It was neither a symbol of aggression nor an instrument of intimidation. It was a tool for understanding, designed to illuminate rather than destroy. In the final view, the U-2 stands as a testament to what is possible when engineering ambition aligns with human responsibility. It reminds us that progress is not defined by how far or how fast we can go, but by how wisely we choose to use what we build. High above the Earth, where the air thins and the horizon expands, this aircraft quietly demonstrated that knowledge can be as powerful as force, and that seeing clearly can change the course of history. The legacy of the U-2 endures not because it dominated the skies, but because it reshaped the way humanity navigated an era of existential risk. It showed that the pursuit of understanding, carried out with discipline and ingenuity, can unite technology and purpose in service of a more stable world. And in doing so, it reaffirmed a central truth of aviation itself. The history of flight is written not only in speed and altitude, but in steel, ingenuity, and the enduring will to challenge limits.